to Season 6, Episode 20 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading James Hitchcock's History of the Catholic Church from the Apostolic Age to the Third Millennium, this time covering Part 2 of the last chapter. We were talking about the new nations, talking about the United States, Canada, and Australia. Kind of left off in the middle of the section on the United States. We'll be picking up there again, talking about Americanism first, I think, is where we left off. It's been, as I mentioned before we started recording, like 2 weeks since I've read this chapter, so not a lot of it's too fresh in my mind, but I remember the gist.
Well, we'll just riff on it and
All right,
go on unrelated monologues.
Well, you always do.
What about you? You need to pipe in, be off topic more often.
I'm so sorry. I guess I'll get on that or something.
I don't think you will. You're too much of a rule follower.
That's supposed to mean.
I don't know. What was I going to say? I was going to say something brilliant. Completely lost it. Went out.
You know it was brilliant.
Yes. It was too brilliant for me to articulate. I just didn't have it. Oh, we only have one more chapter left. Do you know that?
Yeah, that's true. We need to figure out the next book we're reading.
Oh, my God. Yes. Well, it's going to be your choice. This was my choice. I think.
Yeah.
You just pick whatever. Then we can do a comic or something.
Maybe we can always get suggestions on our Twitter for books to read at ULMTD Opinions. Tweet us suggestions for us to read next semester. Anyone who's listening.
We should have a contest that we will have a season of a podcast based upon any book that that somebody suggests on Twitter.
I don't know how good that would go. Somebody out there has to be listening to at least the first minute of this, because I think that's really where our listenership drops off. I think a lot of people click on them sometimes and then drop off after a minute of hearing our voices. So if they hear something in the first minute, there's a chance to just tweet us something ridiculous, and then we'd have to do that.
We could probably do something more contemporary. Especially well, you've been involved in local political ideas and that kind of stuff. And I used to be involved in politics, and I'm an attorney, and it seems like there's so much lawfare going on with politics and stuff. Maybe we do something more contemporary or something.
Do that.
I am, if anybody wants to check out I don't know, I guess you'd have to catch it live in my AM radio station program, Legally Speaking, on KJFF. I've got to prepare for tomorrow morning because I'm going to do part 2 of, I think, 3 parts of the Trump legal cases.
Oh, good.
Last episode before we went out of town was about the civil lawsuit. That's the trial's currently going on, and then I'm going to do the federal prosecutions, and then I think I'll just do one episode on the crazy New York State criminal prosecution and the Georgia RICO prosecution. Oh, maybe split those up. Yeah.
What time, Dad, do those air? In case anyone wants to catch them.
AM 1400. You could stream it from anywhere in the world, and that's Mondays at 8:30. But
Central Time.
Yes, but it's every other week. Every other week is another local attorney who talks about funny legal stories and that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
I think he's more interesting.
You're the serious one, and he's the funny one?
Yes. I ran out of jokes.
That sounds about right.
Well, I've often said I could be a great comedian, but I don't know any good jokes. I don't know any jokes. That's not a joke. I thought I could be very funny. Only I could say funny things.
That's like the requirement of being funny.
I need a writer. I need somebody to write jokes for me, and then I can be a brilliant comedian. I need to have a brilliant writer, or writers, maybe a team, and I can go out there and I can say the jokes.
There you go. That's a great idea, Dad.
Write them in my voice, so that the delivery by me is natural.
Yeah, I bet that's good.
The only thing. That's the only thing holding me back my comedic career
is the comedy.
That's correct. I got everything else worked out.
That's great. That sounds like a really well thought out plan that you're very prepared for.
Well, I mean, it's just that one last piece of the puzzle. that needs to be put in place.
I don't think it's a piece of the puzzle. I think that's the whole puzzle. I think you're missing the whole puzzle, actually.
All right.
You have like an instruction booklet for the puzzle. You just don't have the puzzle. That's not how that works.
Well, someday I'm going to meet a very funny writer that has stage fright.
There you go.
And that's what I need. I need to find a comedian, a very, very funny comedian that has stage fright. And then I could go on for him. Although I have a poor memory, so I don't know if I can remember all the jokes. So I think I need cue cards or a teleprompter.
Oh my gosh!
Jokes aren't that good when you're reading them.
That's
so true. Maybe I haven't thought this out. All right, let's talk about what our subject is today, which is America.
Yes,
and then Australia. So this is the second half, as you said, of our podcast about this book, chapter by chapter. And for anybody that's still holding on and listening to us, I mean, don't you have anything better to do with your life? I mean,
it's a good way to get them to stick around.
What kind of loser is an episode? What season is this? Season 6? Season 6, episode what?
20.
20. You are a loser if you've gone through this. How many hours have they listened to us pontificate with no expertise or really any insight about these issues, and yet they still come back? It's kind of depressing. But maybe they're doing other things like giving their dogs a bath or cutting the grass or something.
Maybe.
But why aren't they listening to music?
Who knows?
But since they have stuck with us for so long, our listener, let's talk about the concept of Americanism, which again, I'm professing my ignorance like every episode. I've never heard of the Americanism movement within Catholic thought. Never even heard of it. Have you ever heard of it before?
No.
Before reading this? So really, it's kind of I wouldn't say nationalistic, but it's kind of a patriotic Catholicism. I think is the best way to describe it. And so you have some prominent people that really pushed it. I think a lot of it had to do with these a lot of it Irish Catholic, but other immigrant families and Catholics moving into the United States. And there's this push pull, like, well, are you really American? And are you loyal to the Pope or to the United States? Or are you loyal to your home country, the United States? And so Americanism is really a patriotic realization or movement within the Catholic subculture, if you will, meaning the Catholics of the United States, meaning, not the entire culture of the United States, but the Catholics really having a patriotic feeling and kind of espousing that Americanism and belief in American political philosophy and how it works with Catholicism and how that political theory and religious theory work together and should be spread throughout the world, really. Mm-hmm. I guess that's pretty. I think that's a pretty good summary, don't you think?
Summary,
yeah, of the thought, the type of movement or the philosophy.
Yeah, it kind of sums it up with one of those battle cries, he calls it. He says, leaders were often impulsive and given to battle cries such as, quote, church and age unite. It's the idea that, something about the American system is inherently better than all others. The idea that it should be spread throughout the world sometimes, but that it's, uniquely good for Catholicism and Catholics should really hold the American system in high esteem, compared to other political systems.
Yes. Of course, I think I'm reading through this, I kind of subscribe to the Americanism thought or philosophy or flavor or whatever. It surprised anybody. That struck me as like the chanting or the cry, battle cry of church and age unite. It reminds me of all these battle cries you hear at these left wing protests. It's like they have their own. Well, like what was the crazy? I guess they're neo-Nazis at Charlottesville who are like the most famous people that nobody ever knows who these people are. The Tiki Torch people. Then one of them ran over an Antifa girl or something. But they had like a blood and soil chant. I think it was like an old German phrase. They were chanting something, I remember. So that's on that side of it. But then you have, the Antifa chants and that now the anti-Israeli pro-Palestinian chants of, from the river to the sea.
Yeah.
What is it? Palestine will be free. Isn't that what they say?
I think so. Yeah.
It's catchier than let's murder all the Jews.
That's true.
That doesn't rhyme. And people might not like it. So we'll just kind of use these kind of vague references of, well, it's just between the river and the sea. Can't they go somewhere else where we can kill them there? But anyway, so that was not a chant of the Americanism Catholics. So I don't know if we want to talk about the specific people. I mean, he mentions Archbishop John Ireland. I did think it was kind of interesting. He was kind of nicknamed the Consecrated Cyclone because he was so energetic, I guess you'd say. And he had almost frenetic. He was an almost frenetic champion of the greatest of the nations, meaning the United States. Kind of meddled into politics a little bit, and you see a lot of this overlapping between especially the Irish Catholic priests getting involved in the labor union movement during this period of time, and it was kind of funny. The author mentions that this guy was an unusual among Catholics. I assume he means at the time, in being an ardent Republican at the time, because most of them were Democrats involved in the labor union and that kind of stuff. So then of course there was the temperance movement, which was not popular among the rank and file Catholics. I can tell you that much. Of either Irish or Italian descent, and there was a lot of political upheaval and changes between political parties with regard to the temperance movement and the prohibition. Like in big cities, big party changes and a lot of politicians ended up either winning temporarily, promoting temperance and prohibition, and others completely having their support completely evaporate because they supported temperance. Because, and a lot of it was cultural. You had the working class, and and part of it made a lot of sense because these people would work in a factory in terrible conditions. I mean, almost unbelievable conditions for what people understand now as a workplace. Even people who work in manufacturing, which really in the United States is most likely light manufacturing, which is not the same as what they had back then. But it would be like 12-hour days. And then they would go to the bar and the pub, and they'd have beer and a sandwich and more beers or whatever. And the problem was they're getting drunk. And it's like, I kind of understand it in a great degree because, man, that's a tough life. It's just a grind. And it was at least 6 days a week, if not 7. And so there were a lot of drunks. There were a lot of alcoholism. It was a huge problem.
Yeah.
And it was more pervasive in American society at the time, and especially among Catholics. So you talk about Irish Catholics and Italians and all that, but Irish Catholics were notorious for how much they would drink. But it's kind of like, you talk about fentanyl now, and a fentanyl is a killer. Alcohol is a slower, more gradual death and destruction of a person's, productivity, both as a husband, father, or whatever, or employee. So there's a really good argument for prohibition at the time, and for temperance, and so some of these would be like this Archbishop Archbishop of Ireland, I think, supported the temperance movement, and he was embarrassed that the Irish immigrants had required a reputation for drunkenness and criminality, and he urged temperance, which is not exactly the same as prohibition. Mm-hmm. It's just saying stop drinking, stupid.
Yeah.
So then another prominent person was, according to the author, was Gibbons, and he was let's see, he was a bishop for over half a century. Right?
Yeah.
A long time. And so it was very influential, and he was very prominent, a popularized figure of American Catholics. He, as the author says, he epitomized the patriotic spirit, giving proof that a Catholic could be a loyal American. et cetera, et cetera. And then there's a mention of, the Catholic University during this period of time being founded in 1888. And that's where you stayed over the summer, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Catholic University.
One of the dorms, yeah, for summer.
Beautiful campus. And as I think we mentioned before, it was a beautiful cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I mentioned on here before, I know I mentioned to you that, we got out of the Uber to meet you there. And as we pull up, your brother looks up at this ostentatious cathedral and says, "What a waste of money." He was not impressed.
Biggest cathedral in North America, I believe.
Yes. Now there's another church that claims to be the biggest church. That's the kind of like almost the official Christian church of the United States. I'm trying to remember which one it is.
Oh, I don't know.
It's in Washington, D.C. I think there's an argument about
different, like non-Catholic.
Yes.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
Yeah, biggest Christian church
in
the United States, I think, is Washington, D.C. as well, but I can't remember what the name of it is. All right, so what else do we want to talk about there? The Apostolic Delegation was established in the United States in 1893. Yeah, I forgot to mention the Catholic University of America is in D.C., and it was founded in 1888, which was originally supposed to be a graduate institution. And it was kind of interesting. I thought it was weird that they insisted that they have little emphasis be placed on the study of the Middle Ages because they want to be a more modern institution.
Yeah, it was interesting.
So it's kind of a wrong-headed college from the beginning, I guess.
Well, now they do have a huge like medieval studies program and classics and everything. It's interesting that they had such little emphasis on Middle Ages initially.
I guess everybody else did.
Yeah, I guess so.
Oh, we're gonna, maybe they're trying to be different, I guess, at the time. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, yeah. So there was an apostolic delegation established in the United States in 1893, mainly because of complaints to Rome by American priests that they were being mistreated by their bishops. And there was a famous case of Father Edward McGlynn, and that name rings a bell with me. So a lot of these characters and these names, I'm vaguely familiar with. But he was excommunicated by Archbishop Michael Corrigan. And I know a Michael Corrigan, but it wasn't this guy because this guy died in 1902. And he was the leader of the anti-Americanist bishops. So I guess he was I don't know what he would be, but he was anti-Americanist, not anti-American, but he was against this movement. And because he excommunicated this father because he was espousing radical social ideas like a single tax movement and denouncing Corrigan as a tool of wealth. And kind of reminds me of that bishop in Texas that just got removed from his position because he was directly criticizing Pope Francis. And on one hand, I'm like, amen, brother. But on the other hand, it's like, well, you can't be a subordinate and just completely call him out and criticize. I mean, and I think he kind of acknowledges that, like he said, well,
is that who you're talking about?
Yeah. Isn't he in Texas?
Yeah. Because I've heard competing stuff about him. Because it's like some people claim like, oh, well, he's outright, claiming that the Pope is a heretic. And I mean, if he's doing that, if he's claiming the Pope is a heretic, then I mean, yeah, it makes sense if he was removed from his position as bishop. I mean, you can't have a bishop, crying out, hey, this guy is not, actually in charge of the church and stuff, because that would just lead to incredible division. But I mean, if he's just criticizing Pope Francis, then I mean, I don't think he should be removed. But I mean, it's give and take. I mean, there's a line.
I'm pretty sure he did not call him a heretic. Mm-hmm. I believe he at least implied that he was espousing heretical views.
Yeah, there you go. I think
he was
on the line there.
He was, I think he probably crossed the line. But even he has said after his removal, well, he's the Pope, he can remove me. He was setting up a new website because he needed to control the website. But I don't think he's doing anything that would get him removed from clerically. But I think as a bishop, I don't know. It's kind of like you take one of those positions, you gotta be. It's kind of like in the military, you gotta take the orders and or suffer the consequences when you're not doing it.
True.
Of course, I have no respect for our Pope.
Yes,
at all. Other than all humans have a certain value innately because they're children of God. But beyond that, I have no use for him.
That's good.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's a socialist. He's a communist, he's part of the climate hoaxers, and he's also not real hopeful with regard to the dispute between Israel and Palestine right now, or at least really the Palestinians, I should say. But anyway, back to the Americanist Catholics. I don't know what else we want to say about them. There's some interesting, history there.
The Vatican involvement is interesting. I mean, I'll kind of summarize this. Don't need to go into all of the details, but essentially what ended up happening, Pope Leo XIII sent 2 letters to the American bishops arguing that while separation of church and state was tolerable, it need not be adopted everywhere, and that the state should give positive support to religion. So it's really kind of the issue at stake is you have all these Americanist bishops who are like, well, we should be advocating, worldwide for church and state to be separate because that's how America works and America's the best system. And Pope Leo's like, well, I mean, that's all right, but the state should support religion in some way. We can't just adopt this system. The church can't say, okay, yeah, everybody everywhere all over the world adopt this position because that's just not going to work out.
Right.
It was kind of the end of the Americanist crisis, I guess, or Americanist ideas.
Yeah, and it was, and the book describes this as being a, quote, phantom heresy, end quote, because it really wasn't a heretical beliefs or communication or system. It just kind of vaguely was going against, some of the policies, I guess you'd say, or the advocacy of the church with regard to certain political developments, and it was never declared to be a heresy. It was just like, hey, whatever you're doing there is okay, but what we're doing in other countries where we have active support from the government is okay too. And
because what he says is, it was merely a set of attitudes that carried far enough might have become heresy. So it wasn't heresy itself, but if you keep this idea of, the American church is the only true church because America is the best system. Well, I mean, pretty clearly you can see how that can lead to pretty much, separation with the actual church.
Right. Yep. So then there's another reference to Pope Pius X's condemnation of modernism, which kind of, which is later. It was a decade later what we're talking about here with this Americanism and these letters. And because he condemned the modernism as being destructive of people's faith and all that, and warning people about it. And so that, there's some question about that Americanism was a kind of a species of the same thing, but that really was kind of, what the author says is kind of really tenuous, but it's kind of, like you said, it's kind of like a theme. If you carried it further, you could see it being a problem, but it really wasn't a problem. It was just kind of an overlap between patriotism and Catholicism, and it didn't seem like it became too big of a crisis. The Pope issued a couple letters, and people are like, okay, fine. We're not violating that. We agree with that.
He does say, though, that modernism did have a problem a little bit in modern biblical criticism. He points out the example of this one guy, William Sullivan, who was a Paulist. He concluded that the true meaning of the gospel lay in its moral teachings and exorciating the church because of her dogmatic tradition, which he charges completely out of step with American democracy. So he's saying, it's none of this stuff really happened. We don't really care if any of it happened. It's just the moral teachings that are important. And then he ended up leaving the Catholic Church entirely and became a Unitarian minister. So there you go.
That's gross. Every time these people like break with the Catholic teaching, it's a theme. They break with the church and they go off the deep end into not believing anything. I mean, Unitarianism is just like a Christian club.
Yeah, everybody's right.
Yes, and no one is.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. So, but what I was really interested in this part of the book is the description of the growth of the Catholic Church in America. From 10 million members in 1914 to 45 million 50 years later. I mean, it just kept growing and growing. And, the various institutions multiplied, religious vocations were plentiful. There's a high level of mass attendance. And I will say this, just from personal experience, I've noticed the decline in church attendance pretty regularly in the last really 20 years. And I'm sure it was going on before that. But there was a reorganization of the archdiocese and consolidation of different parishes. And I didn't like it. I don't know that I still don't like it. But we went to Mass today, and it's crowded. and it feels different when it's crowded than when it's half empty. And it's crowded because they cut the number of masses in half. And so like if I want to go to 11 o'clock mass, I got to go down the street to Sacred Heart. And I know I got to get there earlier now because otherwise you're kind of jammed into a crowded area, and you want to get your spot. Although I haven't established my habit of where I'm going to sit yet in that church. I always have to have where I'm comfortable sitting. But anyway, and there is something to be said for a full church, even if it's resulting from cutting the number of masses in half. It is just more of a community, I think. But anyway, go ahead.
The broken window theory, that if you're walking past an abandoned building and if there's already one broken window, then odds are, you won't feel anything wrong with throwing a rock and breaking another window. It's like that same idea. If the church already feels empty, then you won't feel as much shame in not coming to mass next week. It's like, well, so many people also aren't going to mass. I think it kind of relates.
Yeah, I don't feel any shame. If I but I will. I feel. Maybe I should. I guess, but I felt like. But I think your analogy is correct in the sense that it feels more vibrant, and it feels like that everybody else is doing this too. You feel like you feel more like the norm than the minority. Within your own church, because when you look around, it's like, of course, it's the same people. I recognize the same people, and I see that Our Lady's people, which is from our home parish, and they're in Sacred Heart. And so we see each other, and we're like, hey, how's it going? It's like, we're over here now. Yeah. But then I didn't even know, a couple of guys I didn't even know were Catholic. They go to Sacred Heart. I mean, they're people I know from Rotary. I'm like, I didn't know he was Catholic. And at first I thought, maybe he was just visiting, but he's there every week. So, I think, he is Catholic. So, and I always liked him. He's a good guy. Anyway, so what else we want to talk about? So, the United States ceased to officially be a mission country not until 1907. They really delayed that decision because the Catholic Church had been grown so huge, and I don't know. Is there another country that has more Catholics than the United States?
I don't know.
I don't know. At some point, you think.
A lot of the African countries are rising, and I know in some places it almost feels like we're becoming a mission country because both of the previous priests here at the Catholic Newman Center have been from Africa. Like the priest we have now is a Ugandan man. He's very nice. He's a very good priest, but it's different. It's a different feel. You have a priest from another country,
right? Yeah, that's for sure. The vocations are in the toilet. Yeah. Although some of them are growing or holding steady. And it's always in the more traditional archdiocese or dioceses that they actually get people that because they believe in something. But when you have it loosey goosey, people don't want to sign up for it. And it's always by diocese because it seems like the bishop sets the tone, I guess. Anyway, so 1911, two Boston priests founded the Foreign Mission Society, the Maryknoll group, which I'm vaguely familiar with, and they were well known. I don't know how much they do now. I assume they're still active. And monasteries, the Trappist houses in Kentucky and Iowa, for a long time there was in the 1840s they were founded, but for a long time the monks were from Europe, even though they were in the United States. But then in the 20th century, Americans too began to join the monasteries. And so there's the whole next section is the church and social issues, which is really complex, in my opinion, because now the Catholic social justice teaching is just left-wing lunacy. But when it started out, it seemed like they really thought it through a lot better, and there was a more fervent anti-communist attitude because they recognized communism for what it was, which is an anti-God, anti-religious belief system, and they knew that no matter what, you could say, okay, we want government intervention in X, Y, or Z, but we ain't those damn communists, and we're not socialists. So you have that. That's really, I think, the dynamic in a nutshell, right there. And so the Catholic social teaching, social Catholicism, was propagated from a German school of Catholic social thought initially, and a lot of it's tied up with the labor unions and the poor working conditions of the working the working poor. And it really was a completely different world than what we live in. There were literally no labor laws in the vast majority of the United States. If they did have labor laws, it was state by state only. And so, that there was a push pull of, okay, you want to support the labor unions and the working people, but you don't want to support the socialist activists within the labor union. So that's really the where they came down to. And I thought it was really kind of funny. Immediately after World War I, there was a push to exhort women to withdraw from the workforce and devote themselves to their families. And some bishops even opposed child labor laws, saying it interfered with the family decision to have the kid go to work. It really was a different, because they didn't have any laws against little children working in factories. And you say, well, why would you have these kids doing child labor? Well, their little fingers can work a lot of the machinery better and more accurately. And of course, you don't have to pay them much at all. But you pay them, and it supplements the working poor's. And there's no social. There wasn't, hey, I'm going to lay around the couch and play video games all day and get a check. Mm-hmm. That didn't exist back then. If you didn't work, you starved, literally. Unless somebody helped you out. So these kind of issues were really right in the heart of Catholic social teaching, trying to make sure that people had what you really call a living wage, because that's the only way you could live if you had enough, and your working conditions were improved. And I think the book is correct that the Catholics very much supported the New Deal under Roosevelt. Very popular certainly among Irish Catholics. And it was common to have, a picture. You'd have maybe three pictures on the wall in a Catholic home. It would be Jesus, Mary, and FDR. And then FDR was replaced by JFK. I'm not kidding. Maybe you have that would be the fourth, because it was almost like a religious devotion to the Democratic Party because of those social programs and what they believed was brought them out of the Depression and all that kind of stuff. Father Coughlin was a really interesting cat who was during the New Deal. Mm-hmm. He didn't pass away until 1979, but he had a radio program and a magazine. He was very prominent, almost like what do you call those demagogues? And he had, he started from an Orthodox Catholic base, but his criticisms of the free market led to passionate condemnations of capitalism itself. So that's a quote from the book. Mm-hmm. And he really supported the New Deal and Roosevelt as some kind of savior, but he soon condemned Roosevelt as himself as a servant of wealth, and then he increasingly identified Jews as a principal malefactors in international affairs, and et cetera, et cetera. And so he had his day in the sun, and then went off the deep end, and probably a nut from the beginning. But he was very, very well known, very prominent. He was a cause celeb back in the day.
Interesting,
because if you had a radio program, a national radio program, that was the bee's knees in that era. To use a phrase. So Dorothy Day, who I was thinking Doris Day, was she the Que Sera? Do you know that song? Que Sera? Anyway, that's not her. It's Dorothy Day. That's a wonderful song. If you want to listen to that later, she had a beautiful voice. And it was in a movie, a great suspense movie that we should see. I will think of it later. But it's not Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day was the founder of the Catholic worker movement. She was a pacifist and all that stuff, and she was part of the new radicalism. The Catholic Worker Party, and I think they might even still exist. They're a bunch of commie bastards. But they initially defined themselves as violent anarchists, so you see where that went. But they were very much left-wing, social justice type people.
Yeah. But
they had more, more rational basis to believe those things back then, as I've already explained ad nauseum. But they're definitely a left-wing or anarchist movement within the Catholic Church, and it was pretty successful, pretty prominent, as far as, people knowing who they were and what they had a magazine, I think, that they published, the Catholic Worker. And so it's those kind of things were going on for decades. Like we're talking about like the 1930s and 40s. Any thoughts? I'm kind of going on monologues here.
No, I mean, these are good. I mean, I'd never heard of the Catholic Worker Party before this. Like I never heard of them.
Yeah, I should look it up. You would hate them. Yeah.
Probably. It sounds like it.
Well, like I said, I think they started out right, but then it just kind of goes off the way, the leftward turn. So the church in the modern world, well, there's going to be anti-Catholicism. And there was a whole lot of that. I think we talked about that last episode. It's been a little bit of time since we went through that, but like with the Know Nothing Party, they were succeeded by the American Protective Association trying to limit Catholic immigration, and of course the Ku Klux Klan. And these people that nowadays, first of all, they don't even know who the Ku Klux Klan was, but they act like they're still around. They were Democrats. Number one, they were racist and they hated blacks, but they really hated blacks, but they hated Catholics. There was an anti-Catholic movement, and so if anybody asks you, like, are you from a repressed people? The answer is yes. Because you were Irish and you're Catholic, and there was a tremendous amount of oppression, systematic legal oppression against Catholics, and Ku Klux Klan was an extra legal group, but it shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah,
that they were opposed to Catholics because we were papists and all that kind of stuff, and I mean, they were obviously worse than the Freemasons, but the Freemasons were horrible too to Catholics. And those are our founders, but I can overlook that for all the good stuff that came about it. Anyway, and of course, that Catholicism was just kind of anti-Catholicism always go hand in hand with anti-Jewishness. But there was a Catholic governor in New York, Alfred Smith, who was very popular, but he was defeated decisively in I think it was, what year was that? He was running for 28. Yeah, he was running for the nomination for president, and a lot of it was because of his religion. And I kind of understand how people who are not Catholic would be suspicious of Catholics because of the papal infallibility, and it's such a structured religion.
Yeah,
I could see how people would say, well, what is the president going to do if he's Catholic and the Pope calls up and says, hey, I want you to do X? Are you going to say, no, I don't care? And really the reality is the answer is no, mind your own business.
Yeah.
But that was a big thing.
That sentiment a lot, especially about like the organized religion stuff. Because that's like a big thing that I think a lot of like the weirdo sort of like non-denominational people say is like, well, I'm Christian, but I'm not religious. I don't follow a religion. I follow Jesus. I think a lot of people see like Catholicism or the more structured like Protestant faith, Lutheranism or so, as just like, a series of step-by-step stuff. And they're like, oh, well, that's not how you follow Jesus. That's just like a rule book. That's just, ritual for no reason. I think that's a big sentiment. Yeah. I think still, and even more so now than it was then, for sure.
But yes, I completely agree that it's more prominent now. But I think the thought, though, that Catholics would be in league with the Pope was probably more powerful then, because now there's so many Catholics that are like Joe Biden, that are not Catholic. And if the Pope ever did say, hey, you know what, you're not supposed to really be paying for abortions, with the taxpayer money, you think Joe Biden's going to care what the Pope has to say? No, Joe Biden's, he's really the most corrupted president in our entire history, I think.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's the most corrupt. I don't think he has any ideals or standards that he would it's a hill he would die on. I don't think there's a single one.
Yeah, kind of agree.
He just gave a speech, a really strong defense of Israel after the massacre in 10/7, and he's already backtracking and now, because there's a lot more supporters of the Palestinians within the Democratic electorate than there are Jews. And you can see the calculation going on in real time. But, he used to be against abortion. Now he's for abortion. He used to be against
gay marriage.
Yeah, he's against gay marriage. Now he's for gay marriage. He was against, I mean, go far enough back, he was against busing, desegregation. He was against desegregation. He said some pretty crazy stuff. And he was really good friends with Strom Thurmond. Speaking of the KKK, that guy was a Grand Knight or whatever they call him in the Ku Klux Klan. And everybody knew it, you know. But he said, well, he gave that up. And Biden was palling around with him. Did he speak? Did he give his eulogy?
Yeah, at his funeral. He spoke at his funeral. Yeah.
So that guy, yeah. So I think he helped.
Though this is an aside, but something that I heard about today. There is a weirdo Democrat in office who does have a hill that he will die on. That's John Fetterman. Have you seen the stuff that he's been saying like about Israel and stuff?
Yes.
It's wild because all of the other Democrats are like, yeah, go Palestine, whatever, or just being silent about it. But he has been like solid, like hardline pro-Israel, which is crazy to see. There's a great clip of him. Dude's insane and is really a horrible senator. Because I'm sure you've seen the clips of him like wearing shorts and a hoodie and stuff. But there was a group of like pro-Palestine people outside the one of the Capitol office buildings, and evidently they said something to him like, "Oh, the blood's on your hands for supporting Israel." And then because they were protesting on Capitol grounds, they were being arrested by the Capitol Police and moved, wherever. And so Fetterman went into his office, came back out waving an Israel flag as they're being arrested by the Capitol Police, which I don't like the guy, but is admittedly very funny a thing for him to do.
Yeah. Well, they say a broken clock is right twice a day.
That's true.
So, yeah, I mean, going back to that politically, who would have been a better senator for the people of Pennsylvania, him or Dr. Oz? What happened to Dr. Oz? He's a Republican, right? Isn't he? He's got to be. Isn't he? Barnstorming across the country in favor of Republican candidates, right? Dr. Oz, right? Oh, so I mean, people are upset by the Republicans not having a Senate majority, and that's a big reason there because we put up candidates who are these people? They're celebrities.
I have no idea.
I don't know. It's depressing, but it's good to see that that guy, Fetterman, for all his faults, actually believes in something.
Yeah. He's a scary dude, though. He's a scary dude to see walking around the halls of the Senate. That's for sure.
Well, even if he was waving around a Palestinian flag, at least he believed in it. If he's consistently doing it, like that Rashida Tlaib and what's the Somalian the gal immigrated from Somalia. What's her name?
I know who you're talking about.
Ilhan Omar. Is that her name?
Ilhan Omar. Yeah.
They believe in something.
Crazy.
I mean, at least they stick to it.
Yes.
They believe in something. I respect that. People voted for that, and they've said they're going to support these causes. They're supporting them. Crying out loud. I don't think I agree with anything they believe. I'm sure there might be some overlap, but at least they're not Biden. Biden is worse because he just does whatever is most likely to lead to his power. But he's
finally backfiring on him because he has slipped in the polls, especially like among young people, because they're like, oh well, you don't support the current thing or whatever. But who knows? Yeah.
Well, maybe they realize he's just freaking ancient. I mean, whatever. All right, so let's move it down a rabbit hole. All right, so what else do we want to talk about? Oh yeah, the popular culture. A lot of people don't realize that the standards for Hollywood, the original rating systems, there's a code of conduct, was written by a Jesuit. The Catholics were very involved in those kind of self-censorship schemes because there's so many Catholics in the country. If the Catholics came out against, and they were devout Catholics. They were actually going to mass. So if the Catholic Church said this movie is horrible and you should not go see it, it would end careers.
Yeah.
But anyway, so they wanted to have a conduct code that would say yes, this is okay for a movie, this is not okay, and that was written by a Jesuit. So I thought that was interesting. And there's a whole bunch of Catholic movies, and they're fun to watch for me. Rewatch because there's a list of them that he has in there: Boys Town, Fighting Father Dunn, Going My Way, The Bells of St. Mary's, and The Miracle of the Bells, and they were popular movies. Mm-hmm. And Boys Town was a big one, and it's so shocking now to watch a movie where a priest is just a good person, period. Like it's a character that is a good character, and it's not like, well, he's okay in this, but he's like raping children or whatever, because he's corrupt. You very rarely see a priest just being portrayed as just a good person, devout person. You'll see it about other religions, or if there's a priest who's going against the Catholic Church, that you might have a depiction of that. But I thought it was weird, though, that the author takes issue with the Boys Town book, because he says, taken at face value, such films deny the reality of sin, and he quotes, quote, "There's no such thing as a bad boy," end quote, by portraying apparent evil as merely the result of misunderstanding or neglect. That is an inaccurate statement about that quote. That quote is from Boys Town, and it's an orphanage for children who it's run by a very prominent Catholic priest. And what he's saying is that the kids do wrong, but there's no such thing as a bad boy, a bad child. They're minors, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
They're not bad people. They're kids, and they've been mistreated, and they've been neglected, and they do bad things, and they're punished for bad things. But his point was, there's no such thing as a bad boy. And that is 100% Catholic thought. And this author, I don't know why he mentions that was somehow diluting the belief in sin, or that people couldn't be evil, or that sins were just a misunderstanding or because of neglect. Well, when it comes with a kid, if you're 7 years old and you do something bad, I don't think that you're 100% guilty of whatever it is. Like that there's a kid that shot his kindergarten teacher. That kid's not responsible for shooting a kindergarten teacher. There's obviously something else going on there, either psychologically or from a parent. Now, when they're getting to 16, 17, 18, I'm with you. But anyway, so that was a little rant. I've had that highlighted. Well, thank you. By the way, he also mentions, like in the Catholics were very prominent in the media and the power and portrayed and followed. Like Notre Dame was a big deal. It still is very popular, but not like it was then. And he mentions the Notre Dame football team having a huge following, and they would have communion before every game, and it made Catholic piety seem normal and manly, which I think needs to return.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say, as an aside to you, because I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, there were four. They were called the Four Horsemen of Notre Dame. It was a very powerful backfield that were well known. I mean, across the country they were known, and one of them was Elmer Layden, and that is your grandfather, my dad's cousin.
Oh, really?
Yeah, from Iowa. Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and my dad's uncle is mentioned in Elmer Layden's autobiography. And my dad, my dad's, is it his uncle or his cousin? Anyway, so yeah, my dad's a relative of my dad is mentioned in the autobiography, and because that relative was a detective in Iowa, in Davenport, Iowa, and I have his detective's badge in my office. Really? Yeah. So the one thing my dad specifically left to me is because I was a prosecutor at the time, was this detective's badge. It has this history that dates back to his relative, who is a number one detective badge from that town, and that person is mentioned in Elmer Layden's autobiography. So I like that. That's pretty aside. That's really interesting. Pretty tenuous relationship. But Elmer Layden was from Iowa, and so was his family, and so my dad was related to him. So that was his claim to fame. And I have that autobiography somewhere in storage down here in the basement, because my brother got that when my dad passed, but he gave it to me because I was asking about it because I had that badge. And so my brother just gave it to me. He said, well, you have a badge, you can take the book. It's very nice. It's my dad's book. Anyway, so Catholics in war. There was heavy Catholic participation. They were the working class, and they went to war. And they were fervent anti-communists during the Cold War. And so that really all this participation in the patriotic struggles and fights really eliminated any claims that they weren't fully American and were somehow not loyal to the country. And then there was also mention of Father Sheen, who coincidentally died in 1979. He was a national director for the propagation of faith, and he was very prominent. And got really high known, high publicity converts to the Catholic Church, and his anti-communism, his insistence that faith in God was the only answer to both personal and social problems was very well received. And he was just a really well known person and a good person to proselytize to the masses. So for the 2 decades, and the author points out, the 2 decades following the Second World War, it was really the peak of the American Catholic history. The vocations were through the roof. Church attendance was great. The loyalty to Pope and the Vatican and all that kind of stuff. Of course, then we have Vatican II, but he mentions Trappists could scarcely build monasteries fast enough to accommodate the influx of vocations. I mean, can you imagine that? I mean, it really was the heyday of the Catholic Church. And the author talks about the difficulties in this expansion because going to suburbia, people wanted to have a home with a yard and space for their families and their kids and all that stuff. And he does mention like the architecture, like the churches were put up that were often, as he says, often so utilitarian that it was indistinguishable from other buildings. But he mentions how they would build the church and the gymnasium first, and you'd have church in the gym while you're building the church. And guess what happened at Our Lady's? That gym was the church, and it has the interior structure looks like it was built as a church.
So I remember we would have problems with CYC volleyball games sometimes because our ceiling was too low because it wasn't built as an actual gymnasium. It was built as a church. And so every once in a while you'd hit the ball on the ceiling and then have to like call it either way. It was a big inconvenience for us like 8th graders or something.
Yeah, but Our Lady's was built because Sacred Heart was too small to accommodate all the parishioners in Crystal City. So they split off as a new parish, and Our Lady's became bigger than Sacred Heart. And now we're kind of revamping or going back to kind of consolidating a little bit with the masses, as I talked about earlier. But they knew then, as we seem to have forgotten, that the parish school was the key to everything. All the social life was centered around the church and the kids. And it mentions, fundraising projects, those kind of things. You meet the other parents. It's still true today, and I think the church just really misses the boat and not insisting that every parish have a school. Instead, they're trying to shut the schools down, and we should just be bankrolling them. That's where our money should be going, just to subsidize, and it should be almost free for Catholics, but with the stipulation that somehow. Well, you can keep track of it. You can have an e-sign up, but if you go to mass, you get free tuition. I mean, why not? And if you say, well, I don't want them keeping track, well, they don't get free tuition. I mean, if you're Catholic, it only goes to only the priest knows that you're there. Well, why can't he just issue you a waiver? And if you're going to be going anyway, why don't you just let him know? Or you just fill out a slip or something. It had to be an electronic because maybe you don't want anybody else to know. But anyway, so that's another little rant. I like this. This is before my day. The adolescents would go to the gym, pray the rosary in front of a statue of Mary, followed by a chaperone dance. Well, that's like that's like utopia in my mind, and it'd still be fun, But the kids would know each other and that kind of stuff. And then it also mentions that priests would never leave the grounds without being in the clerical garb, but they would be at the parish picnic, maybe in a polo, and drinking beer with everybody, and behaving appropriately. But it was very much a social hub for the entire community, and I think we've lost that.
Yeah, I agree.
But they're talking about this Episcopal leadership now during this time, because it was such an expansion and moving from one area to the other. Getting out of the cities and going to the suburbs. The best priests, the best administrators, best bishops were those that had administrative skills and were able to fundraise.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a whole different talent set than somebody that's a philosopher or a theologian.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not so good. But it really was the brick and mortar bishops were really the most successful during this era.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he talks about the liberal anti-Catholicism that rose up, which I guess we're really talking about in the 60s, right? Late 50s and 60s. And we're talking about not classical liberalism, but the modern liberalism we talk about, the left wingers.
Yeah, I really like the point he makes is like, fighting in the wars and, opposing communism and stuff like that did great for, conservative people. But the liberals, that just proved, these Catholics just have blind loyalties. They can't think for themselves. They're so stupid, et cetera. And that's really where you're getting this new wave of anti-Catholicism is these people is like, they just do whatever anyone tells them to. Yeah. Which is sort of a new brand that I think this is the same brand of anti-Catholicism that we're still dealing with today.
Well, for sure. And it really, and even the author talks about how the Spanish Civil War really kind of caused this split or this realization by the communists that, hey, these Catholics aren't on our side. But, when the Spanish Civil War was really instigated because of the communists killing the nuns and the priests and burning down monasteries and outlawing certain Catholic practices. By the way, the left wingers that just took over the Spanish government outlawed the praying of the rosary as part of a certain political protest. So they had this change in power. And of course, in a Catholic country like Spain, what that resulted in the tens of thousands of people praying the rosary, which was pretty cool to see. Good visual. But so there, it was billed as they outlawed the rosary, but they didn't really outlaw the rosary. They told these people they couldn't pray the rosary at a particular protest spot, which is stupid and wrong. And it's like, why are you even saying that? All they're doing is saying the rosary, for crying out loud. Let them pray. And they wouldn't do that for any other religion. Especially.
I know a person in the UK was arrested for that, for praying the rosary outside of an abortion clinic.
Correct.
He's just praying.
Yes.
What do you mean? It's insane.
It went further than that. She was praying silently. She ended up going back and praying silently.
That's right. Yeah.
And they said, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "What do you mean what I'm doing here? I'm standing here." "Well, what are you doing? Are you praying?" "Well, yes, I'm praying," because she's honest. And they arrested her.
That's insane.
Because the nothing could be everything has to be sacrificed to the god of abortion, and that's just the truth. It's a child sacrifice. I mean, they're just evil people, and I'm becoming more and more agitated and radicalized by the pro-abortion people. But be that as it may. So what else? Religious liberty, racial justice. Yeah. So the official Catholic support for racial equality had been clear for decades and decades. And some prominent bishops work very strongly to bring white and black Catholics together and stand for racial integration, including Cardinal Ritter here in St. Louis and other bishops. Who is it? The Archbishop Joseph Rummel of New Orleans excommunicated white Catholics for defying his authority. I mean, that's pretty tough. Yeah, but it needs to be done. And I think it was probably an administrative dispute. Mm-hmm. In the civil rights movement, priests and nuns were on the front ranks. I mean, they were on the right side of these types of things, they weren't. The church wasn't as singularly on the right side with regard to the slavery issue, as we discussed in the previous episode. And now, the Hispanic immigration, which has been going on for a few decades now, that now they're probably the largest racial group, I guess you'd say, or religious group within the whatever not racial, because it's a subset, I guess, of Catholics or Hispanics. I mean, that's got to be the number one within the United States now. Especially when they actually go to church. There's a mention, I already talked about John Kennedy being a Catholic and him getting elected. But it was a controversial issue during that election. So then what else?
I think it's interesting just to mention that Kennedy overcome that prejudice, that he would, serve the Pope essentially. but denying that his religion could or should have significant influence on public policy. And Catholics, just happy to have a Catholic in the White House, just kind of accepted that. But that's not a good thing for a Catholic to say. I think just looking at that at face value, it's like, oh, well, my religion will have no impact on my public policy. Well, I mean, I think it should. I think it absolutely should. I mean, Joe Biden's quote unquote religion should at least, forbid him from funding abortions, but he does not.
You would think that. Yeah. And I think that has been talked about since Kennedy's election. And I think it's come down to, like, there's been a lot of religious leaders, especially on the Republican side, that have said what you've said, that you're not going to take orders from your church leaders, but you're going to be influenced by your own religious beliefs and belief in what is right and wrong. So that's how it's articulated now. And I think you're right. Kennedy had to overstate it a little bit to overcome that prejudice. I think so.
Yeah, well, we do like anti-abortion tablings here on campus every once in a while with the Students for Life group, and we've had people come up to us. There's just one earlier this semester who's like, "So what religion are you guys? Does your religion influence why you're here?" And I kind of spoke up. I'm like, "Well, yeah, I mean, I'm Catholic, and of course, abortion is considered one of the worst offenses, by the Catholic Church in the modern day and stuff. But that's not why I'm out here." Right. Yeah. It's not because, a priest told me or the bishop told me, hey, you need to go oppose abortion. That's not how it happened at all. It's because I'm Catholic and I have these ideas on like the sanctity of life and stuff like that. That's why I'm out here. It informs like the base level of all of my ideas, but it's not because I'm told by somebody that I'm going to come out here and do these things now. I mean, I think that's what a lot of people think.
Yes. And I think a more aggressive approach may be to say, well, the Church of Satan agrees that abortion is okay. So does that make you a member?
I don't think that would have gone over too well.
Well, to be the truth. But it's kind of what the counter example of what that person's saying. It's like, well, wait a second. If I have to be a religious person to be on this side, don't you have to be a Satanist to be on the other side? Well, no to either, right? Because you could just be a rational human being that thinks that killing little babies is wrong. You could be an atheist and believe that.
Yeah,
true. Come on, show some humanity. But it's inconvenient. I will agree with anybody who wants to advocates for abortion that having children is inconvenient. I will agree that is true.
Yes.
But it's a net positive. Anyway.
Inconvenience does not justify murder.
Well, to them it does.
That's true.
But I had a big career. Well, it's like the whole, what's it, Stevie Nicks' defense of her abortions.
Disgusting.
She was pregnant by, I think I mentioned this before on the podcast, but Don Henley of the Eagles. I mean, that baby would have been like either, it could have been nothing, just an average person, but it might have been the most talented musician in the history of the world. Those two really talented musicians.
Yeah. Instead, she said, I had to have that abortion. Otherwise, there would have been no Fleetwood Mac. I'm like, well, I'm fine with that. I would have been fine with not having Fleetwood Mac. That's fine with me if you had and not aborted your child.
Yes. But she doesn't agree. And I think on some level she does. I mean, I think she knows, but I think you have to say that. But anyway, let's move along to the Catholic left, the commie bastards of the world. So I don't know what else to say other than that. So that even talks about these nonviolent, so-called nonviolent left-wingers, the Catholic New Left. Trying to, there's a mention that the Catholic New Left's distinctive tactic was to engage in symbolic, almost liturgical acts, pouring blood on draft records and denting the nose cones of rockets, differing from the secular left in its religious roots and professed philosophy of nonviolence. Of course, there was violence. They mentioned the Berrigans serving as character witnesses for a terrorist who set off a bomb that killed a young father. And the Berrigans and several of their associates served prison terms for a botched plot to kidnap government officials. And then in St. Louis, close to our hometown, a Carmelite friar, praised by his confreres as a man of deep spirituality, went to prison for a failed attempt to get money for radical causes by what? Robbing a Catholic rectory at gunpoint. Wild. I mean, it's come on.
Yeah.
And then there's the leftist National Catholic Reporter is discussed, supported radical politics and the sexual revolution and about equal measures. So were they Catholic? No, they were not Catholic. They were just leftists, and they like to dress up like Catholics. Evil.
Like the Catholics for choice people. Oh, you're not Catholic.
Right. Just be for choice. Just be a Satanist. Why do you have to pretend? Have some honesty about your evil beliefs. Mm-hmm. And if anybody who's still listening to this is pro-choice, I'm not sorry. I'm glad that you're having to hear it.
That's true.
But they've logged off long ago. So it's just a secret pro-life podcast. Now we can talk about our plot to take over the world. Cardinal Bernardin. Joseph Bernardin was very prominent, Archbishop of Chicago. And he urged the consistent ethic of life, which meant embracing support for programs to help the poor while opposing abortion. And that's the way. That's really the way. That's what we're supposed to be doing. To support the poor that need help and that will help themselves, and at the same time opposing abortion. And that's the pro-life program in a nutshell.
And that's like the one of the stupidest arguments I hear from the pro-choice people is like, oh, well, if you're pro-life, why aren't you supporting, reform to like the foster care system? Why don't you support, movements to help fund that? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Yeah, we're going to do that too. It's like they think you can only have one and we hate everything else. It's just ridiculous.
Right. Yes. There's talking about more and more Catholics in public office supporting legal abortion. John Kennedy's younger brother, Teddy Kennedy, the killer of Chappaqua. He was a drunk driver, killed his female pastor, left her to drown, and then I think pled to a misdemeanor. Anyway, so there's
I like this point here. He said he served in the Senate for decades and advised by Jesuit theologians, was a staunch supporter of legal abortion. Yep. So here's the Jesuits. Yep.
This is the modern terrible Jesuits that we know and hate. How could they be advising him when he was an unapologetic killer of that poor Mary Jo Kopechne, I think is her name, and nobody ever brought that up to him? Politically, he ran for president. I mean, he almost got in, and then he was talking to the Soviet leadership in advance of Ronald Reagan's swearing in. Mm-hmm. And you talk about like they had the Russia collusion hoax with Trump. Teddy Kennedy actually did it. He was trying to coordinate with them to thwart the foreign policy of the United States in advance of Reagan being sworn in. But whatever, he's Catholic. He's about as Catholic as whatever. Anyway, but that is definitely a prominent political family that was called themselves Catholic. And then of course he mentions, this is a more modern book. So they talk about George Bush dividing Catholics because of his invasion of Iraq, and I think there's some truth to that. Mm-hmm. But his pro-life positions with regard to abortion, tend to carry the day with Catholic voters. And then the division deepened because of Obama's successful enactment of the National Healthcare Program. I don't think Catholics really cared so much. That was not a Catholic issue for voters to have government paid healthcare boondoggles. I mean, I don't think that caused divisions within the Catholic community because of his Obamacare.
This book was published in 2012, so it would have been probably as he was writing it would have been just rolled out, and so probably all the horrendous, I don't know what to call it, the just bureaucracy of it probably wasn't seen by a lot of people.
No, yet. It was known. It was known. It was a hugely controversial and universally partisan act. Not a single Republican vote for it. So it was known to be a boondoggle. It did not divide Catholics. So I'm just speaking from personal experience and knowledge at the time that the author is wrong. He divided Catholics because of his anti-Catholic policies following Obamacare, where he was forcing religious institutions to fund abortion. He sued the Little Sisters of the Poor or something like that, because I think it was the federal government sued them to force them to fund abortion rather than the other way around. I think there were other Catholic hospitals that sued the federal government, but I think they actually sued a convent. But anyway, so I'm just nitpicking with the author. And that went on. The litigation went on for years, and there was no controversy. It's like of course, the press would never divulge to the public anything bad about Obama. But in any event, it does mention that ultimately, as of 2010, 6 of the 9 justices of the Supreme Court were Catholics, which would have been unheard of a few decades prior. I mean, certainly 100 years prior, it would have been unthinkable that you'd have that many Catholics. And I have a theory about that Catholics make the best Supreme Court judges because they have an inherent ability to follow rules and to interpret rules because the religion is rules based. That's my first theory. And of course, the Hispanics. Yeah, here it is. At the time of this writing, the Hispanics constituted a third of American Catholics, and I bet you the percentage is even higher now.
Over a decade ago, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And especially practicing Catholics, because I think they probably still go to church. And so immigration has become a big issue with the Catholic Church and supporting illegal immigration and really facilitating illegal immigration. I think they're going to end up in some trouble with their Catholic charities because they're I think borderline operating a criminal conspiracy at this point in facilitating the unlawful transit of humans across the border.
Interesting.
Because and of course the Catholic Church is Catholic, and so it's universal. And I get all that, and I don't have any problem with supporting people that are in need, especially if they're Catholic and they go to church or whatever. But when they're actively moving people from another country in here, that crosses the line for me. There's Catholic churches in Mexico, for crying out loud. There's Catholic churches in Honduras. That's where we should putting those resources for them to stay where they're at. Because it'll never stop. But anyway, so that's the last thought on the American system, unless you have other thoughts. And then
that's good.
Briefly mentioned, I've talked too much already. We'll talk about Australia, and this is a much briefer chapter.
We'll probably have to fly through this section.
Yes, do it. No,
it's up to you.
All right, so it started as a penal colony. I don't know how much we want to talk about it. It was a penal colony. That's where the English put their criminals, including a lot of Irishmen who were criminals and also Irish revolutionaries. Yeah. And while they were Irish and nominally Catholic, they were mostly criminals. And so they had a lot of problems with getting priests there that were not also criminals, because it seems like they shipped their bad priests down there, and they were as incorrigible as their parishioners. And it was a mess. So they mentioned the first mass ever celebrated in Australia was in Sydney in 1803. But it ends up being like creating a movement for an insurrection. So they disallowed any priestly ministrations until Catholic chaplains were restored in New South Wales in 1820. I mean, so there's obviously a big struggle there, and it was not a free state. And I think that really showed the flavor of what they were dealing with. And then I think it was 1840 they stopped, 1840 they stopped sending the criminals to Australia, and then to Tasmania in 1854. The clergy saw it as uncivilized and irreligious community of people, which I suppose it was. And so then there was a dream by this guy Polding, who was a leader there, and it seems like they would send bishops there, or they would be administrators maybe remotely, but he thought it'd be best to be organized as a basis of a Benedictine monasticism. I'm mispronouncing
monasticism.
Monasticism. Thank you.
Yes. Because he sees these guys, because he was the first bishop of Sydney when it was established in 1834, and so he's looking at all these guys as just a complete lack of religion. It's like, it makes sense. You'd want like almost a monastic code. It's like a real strict sort of authority structure of like, well, okay, here's how we need to do things here, because it's been so long since there's been like a Catholic presence among these people.
That didn't work.
No.
And they had a scattered flock, as the next section mentions, because he went in the bush. I mean, the people spread out, and farmers or ranchers or whatever, and moving out to where they could. And it mentions that the priests might themselves fall prey to alcohol or lax sexual wars. It was just a mess. Some of the pastors claimed personal ownership of the parish property even. And of course, there was a lot of mistreatment of the Aboriginals, the natives of that era, in that area. And large numbers of Irish in the 1840s began arriving. This is like the potato famine. So some of them are going there instead of the United States for a longer journey. And there was a gold rush in Victoria in the 1850s that brought a bunch of people, but it was just miserable. Mm-hmm. There was Catherine Chisholm, who did heroic work among the immigrant children, but she was attacked by Protestants as an agent of the Pope and distrusted by Catholics for being English. And so she returned home where she died in poverty. It's a sad story. That'd be an interesting book, I guess, but sad story. So the Irish clergy were there, but they one of the things they did, they forbade mixed marriages, which means a Catholic and a non-Catholic, but that was evaded or ignored. This is under Polding, and he thought found many of the Irish priests to be an obstacle to a goal of civilizing this semi-barbarous people. Anyway, so
like this quote here, he says he particularly denigrated the alumni of All Hallows College in Dublin, whom he thought the Irish bishops were eager to get rid of. So he's getting all these priests. He's like, you guys suck. You're all coming from the same college.
Right.
They're just sending me all their rejects.
Yes. Yeah, you can see how that would work. Yeah. So there was also a John Brady. He died in 1871 of Perth. Let's see what I want to talk about. He was removed by the Holy See in 1850, but refused to recognize the decree, and supported by a mob at one point, scuffled with his appointed successor in the sanctuary of the church. He was excommunicated and returned to Ireland, still considering himself Bishop of Perth, Australia. Must have been an interesting cat. There's some sectarian strife between the Protestants and the Catholics. I don't know if we want to go through there, but education, of course, was seen as the key to spreading the Catholic religion. Mm-hmm. And there were schools run by the religious society. There was a St. Mary MacKillop. She was Australia's first canonized saint. She died in 1909. She founded one of the numerous female communities called the Sisters of St. Joseph. She was briefly excommunicated by the Bishop of Adelaide. So I don't know what's going on with that, but and so they had higher education. Relatively few Catholics attended universities, but Catholic colleges were nonetheless founded at the universities of Sydney and Melbourne as places where Catholic students could live among their own under supervision, taking general courses in the secular university, but receiving instruction in their colleges. So that's pretty interesting. So Protestantism. Anglicans, of course, are there. The Anglican. There was Moran, wasn't he a bishop? After having strongly supported Australia's entry in the British Commonwealth, refused to attend the official ceremony because the Anglican Archbishop of Sydney was given precedence over him. I'm not going. A lot of back and forth, I'm sure. So then, let's see. Moran was succeeded by Michael Kelly. And then I think he was leadership was passed to Daniel Mannix until his death at almost 100 in 1963. Wow. He was one of the most, according to the author, one of the most remarkable prelates anywhere in the modern church. And he's unequaled in his boldness and possessed the great rhetorical skills, especially a sharp wit, traits that kept him in the public eye continuously for 50 years.
That's impressive.
Yeah, it is impressive. So World War I, let's see, there's a bunch of Catholics fought for the British, even though they were, I guess, the Irish Catholics were not fans of the British, but I guess that's worse. No, this is World War I, so it'd be the Germans were worse. But there was some Catholics urging them not to enlist in the military because of those problems with the British. Let's see. Oh, yeah. So the Mannix was critical of the war. But after the war, in a characteristically bold gesture, he confounded charges of disloyalty by riding in a St. Patrick's Day parade in an open car accompanied by 14 Catholic recipients of the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for bravery in battle. That's great. There was 14 of them. I mean, the Victoria Cross, a big honor.
Absolutely.
So let's see, coming of age. Vatican established the apostolic delegation in Australia just before the First World War, perhaps primarily because complaints that the Irish bishops disregarded canon law and ruled in arbitrary ways. The first Aboriginal priest was not ordained until 1976, but I guess it got done eventually. And they ended up having, their own native clergy, not necessarily Aboriginal, but as they progressed and grew. They had the Knights of the Southern Cross, which were modeled on the Knights of Columbus in the United States, were founded to defend Catholic rights. What else do we want to say about this? Intellectual stirrings. Frank Sheed was one of the most important Catholic laymen in the world during the first half of the 20th century, trained as a soapbox orator by the Catholic Evidence Guild in England. He undertook the same apostolate in his native Australia. He was a very popular author, and he had an important publishing house that was in London and New York. I don't know that guy, but I probably should.
Interesting.
And then B.A. Santa Maria. What do we want to talk about him? Anything, or who is that? I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah. As a young law student named B.A. Santa Maria. He didn't die until 1998. Yep. And they had a paper circulation eventually reaching the remarkable 70,000, which was... he founded it shortly after the Catholic Worker Movement in New York, and his was
his own in Australia. So the Australian the Catholic Worker. Yeah,
go through my notes here and make sure I know what I'm talking about. And then similar type of stuff happening in Australia with the movement. During World War II, communists managed to gain a significant foothold in some Australian labor unions. So Santa Maria embarked on an organized campaign to expel the communist influence. Isn't that refreshing? Mm. Left when you're going after the commies. So they had the similar kind of stuff. So the growth of the church in Australia in 1935, only 17% of Australians were estimated to be Catholic, half of them regular churchgoers. But then later it was after World War II, I guess it was up to 27%. So over a quarter. Mm-hmm. I didn't know there were that many Catholics in Australia.
Yeah, neither did I.
I thought it was almost a completely Protestant nation, but that's pretty good fair amount.
Yeah, that's true.
So any other thoughts about the new nations?
Yeah, that was good. That was a very fast summary of Australia there, but it was good. There's not too much to talk about there. No, I thought this chapter was really interesting, of course, to us, I'm sure, because it most directly affects us probably more than any other chapter. But yeah, I mean, it's he makes interesting points. I'm really looking forward to getting into Vatican II in that next chapter, because I think he keeps skirting around it, and he keeps talking. Oh, well, in the 1960s there was vast decline, in the sort of sexual sort of morals of the people and church attendance and stuff like that. And it's like I think he wants to say because of Vatican II, but he wants to get in more detail into it in the next chapter. And I think there is a very long section on Vatican II there. So that's what I'm really, really interested to hear about there, because it seems like things were going great for the Catholics in Canada and not less so in Canada, because Canada had a pretty big decline, but in Australia and the United States with those big booms after World War II up until the 60s. And then you have this just either stagnation or decline. And so it's interesting to read about it from that perspective, with how strong Catholics were becoming in these nations. Yeah,
and I know we're going to talk about it next time, but I guess the question is whether Vatican II was just a coincidental happening, or it had some part of the causation. But certainly the Catholic leadership in the last few decades has been, I think, lacking as far as growth, and they need to take a more aggressive approach. But
I agree.
Anyway, we'll find out as we read the next chapter in our next podcasts.
True. Do you have any other final thoughts?
No.
All right. Well, this has been Season 6, Episode 20 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.
And you can, of course, follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. Tweet at us any suggestions you have for a book for next season. Please. Yes, please. You have to say it nicely. These are manners.